Thank you, Nico. Clearly a very engaging topic. Can I start by asking a question to the panel? A number of things came up, one of which piqued my interest, which is this connection. Every time we talk about institutions, it seems to me that the next word that comes somewhere in the sentence is this issue of trust. And I noticed Mr. Pekramenos mentioned the need for trust as a key ingredient, trust in the plan, you said, key ingredient in jump-starting the process. And also Elias talked about an institutional gap there. And I just wanted to ask a question to the panel about what is the relationship that you see between institutional gap and trust? Which comes first, the chicken or the egg?
So actually, I think it's a spot-on question. And the best we know, it seems that the two are jointly determined. So let me give a story which I think it comes from a very nice model, like the tool that economists have to discuss. So imagine, as in this country is the case, that you distrust the entrepreneur. You know, someone is starting a new business, Anna is starting a new business, and we distrust her. We believe that she's a crook. She will manage to succeed because she will bribe some politicians, some public servants, and she will get around. So we're distrustful. What will we want? A lot of formalistic procedures, a lot of red tape. She will have to comply with 35 different public agencies, and you will need 35 different licenses. So what will happen afterwards? So you will have red tape, a lot of formalism. So, you know, someone, perhaps Anna or Richard or Michael, some of the three will be, you know, successful in getting around the system. So who will be the successful entrepreneur? The one that managed to get around the system. So what will the people endogenously want afterwards? Oh, there was this exact loophole that, you know, Michael, let's say, managed to get around, so we will want even more regulation. So there is a vicious cycle of distrust that fuels regulation, and red tape, actually the bad aspect of regulation, which in turn leads to distrust. Actually, this is a model to understand also banking. In the US, people distrust banks, so they want more and more regulation, which in turn leads to more and more distrust, because there is always going to be, like, you know, a naked banker, to use your wording. So eventually, this is a vicious cycle. So I think that moving forward, it is massive for many people in the room and for the two clubs and for all of us to tackle these issues of distrust, because it's very hard to foresee a massive in breadth and depth institutional reform without tackling this issue of distrust.
You have the answer. What was exactly the question? I mean, what goes first?
Yes.
Between trust and
institutional
gap. I think they go together. The one affects the other. There is no real priority between them. The one affects the other. That's my answer.
Thank you. And kind of a related question from a different angle, though. You know, there's always this question, every time we talk about institutional failure, there's always this question of how do you fix it? And in the previous panel, someone from the audience said, okay, we all know the diagnosis, we all know the causes, but where do you start fixing? And I think, you know, back to Nikos's comments, you talked about insiders and outsiders. And I think that's a useful way of approaching where the fault lies and where the potential fixes lie. So I was wondering if, again, anyone on the panel had any views about where do you start to fix the system? Because, Ilya, you gave a long laundry list of things that one could do, but I was wondering if one could target the cause and therefore the fix. Who is to be blamed? And if it's not a blame, who is to take action? Who are these outsiders?
Can I answer with an example?
Please.
So by 2012, we had a new law for the universities, which was not perfect, but it was pretty good under the constraints. This law was blocked massively in practice. Even the political system that voted for it didn't all support it. Let me give you one example there. As you know, in Greece, all universities are public. In fact, they're not exactly public. They are they are so much controlled by the government that they are government offices. Okay? And the point of the law was that it would make it more independent and at the same time more accountable. So it wasn't that hard. You can measure, for instance, the research output, productivity, and there are hundreds of Greek academics abroad that would be willing to help the process of evaluating for free. I mean, they would even pay to do this, just to help their country. Now, instead of, and as you may know, in Greece we have 20 universities of this type. Now, can all of them and all these departments be good? Do we have the resources to support 20 universities? The answer is no. So the right way to do it was to give incentives for some of them, give them some space, give them some time, and if they don't perform, consolidate or cut or actually just reward according to performance. Right? That's what common sense does. What did we do? None of that. We cut everybody's salary to half. As a result, what happened? Everybody that was half good left the country. There's your answer.
I'd like to open it to the floor for questions. Dimitri, over here.
This is to Professor Papaioannou. Professor Phelps of Columbia had mentioned that the European South suffered because the previous generations had saved too much. So how would that combine? They had too many savings, too much savings. You know, there was too much savings in all over the European South. So during the crisis, you have unification, European unification, and the crisis hits, they're worse hit because they have too much savings. What would your comment be?
Too much savings.
So actually I have attended a course by Ned Phelps at Columbia, but I'm not sure whether this is true. Actually, when a country runs a current account deficit, a trade deficit like Greece, it has to be by definition that savings are less than investment. And in the case of Greece, the German and the French banks were willing to cover the difference.
Because of the public, not because of the private. Yes, because of the public, because the public is... No, because of the public saving being too negative, what you're saying.
Let me elaborate that. So, in the countries of the European periphery, in Greece, in Spain, in Ireland, and in Portugal, there was a lot of domestic investment which was financed through external sources. In the case of Greece, it was German and French banks either giving money to Greek banks through the interbank market or financing the government by purchasing government bonds, because as Anat explained earlier, those was considered to be risk-free. In the case of Ireland and Spain, it was mostly money going to real estate, and people in the country I live, in London, you know, they were buying houses in Spain or in Ireland. So this is, I don't know whether it was, what exactly was Ned Phelps' point, but this was not clearly the case. Greece and the countries of the periphery depended on foreign capital during the booming years because of some frictions on banking, perhaps of some misbehavior of markets, and then in 2007, 2008, we had like the massive reassessment of risk, and therefore capital started flowing back.
Thank you, Ilya. Over there.
At least during the last 5 or 6 years of the so-called crisis, I have read, heard, witnessed tons of great analysis about the reasons, what caused the crisis, and equally huge volumes of suggestions on what to do to solve it. And within this wonderful closed circle of academics and entrepreneurs, it seems that we agree between us on what went wrong and what we have to do to make it right. Now, my question is, do you believe that anybody else besides this community, outside this room or similar rooms, listens to us? And do you really believe that we're going to do something about it as a country? Thank you.
take it?
I mean, as I mentioned earlier, you're referring to the issue of distrust. There is massive distrust in Greece, even before the crisis. So there was, I could have done a speech on the trust gap. Actually, I did a TED talk on that. So there is a massive distrust, and I don't have and the trust gap has increased considerably. And it seems that you have to convince and reach out to the people. And it seems that the political system in the past 6 to 7 years, perhaps a bit more, has failed to produce a story, a vision, as Mr. Pikramenos mentioned earlier, on how to change this economic model that has dominated Greece, let's be frank, for many, many, many decades. So there are examples of countries that did the big shift, but it was a process that was embraced by the public, embraced by the polloi, and it was also, to a great extent, led by the political system.
This is kind of a difficult question, and it at least indirectly refers to politics. And we have two ex-prime ministers here, so it's hard to say anything. But since you asked, there are two ways to learn. Okay, one way to learn is by experience. Okay, another way to learn is actually if you also think and you listen to others. It seems that we are doing it the hard way. I mean, and to be honest, thank God this is a democracy. But democracies have their limitations, and one of the limitations is that you have to do things that in the short run are painful, even if they're going to pay fruits in the long run. And typically, governments have only like 2 or 3 maximum years of a planning horizon possible. There are countries that have managed, for instance, one that starts with a G comes to mind. They managed to have a consensus and build, 10-year plans and say, we will collectively do something here so that 10 years from now, we are better. But I don't really think we should give up hope. If you really, remember how the UK was 25 or 30 years ago. Remember who was the sick man in Europe 20 years ago. That was Germany. The country has potential. I think we have learned our lesson. I think we've wasted basically 6 years, and we are very wounded. We don't have much time to waste for at least 2 reasons. First of all, there are parts of the society that are actually quite poor, and you can't waste another day. And the second thing is that in terms of macroeconomic arithmetic, if you wait, then the program is not going to work. If people don't listen, maybe it's not that much of it. Maybe the blame has to be shared, partly to them, but also partly to us, who are educated, but maybe we don't say things the way that can be understood.
Sorry. Yes. This is primarily for Professor Vettas, but also for all of you. So given the situation that you presented at the beginning of the crisis, the twin deficits and everything else that you said, was the depth of the recession kind of predetermined, or was there a policy mix that could have resulted after all these years by the beginning of 2015 with less unemployment, let's say, less of a reduction in the GDP, or was that point, or the only thing that could be fiddled with was the rate and the curve and the steepness of the decline, or things like that? And the second part of the question is, it's always difficult to do things in a day, change the judicial system or education or whatever, but it's been 6 years now. So 6 years are not that short. So in 2010, it was too difficult to change everything in a day. In 2011, it was too difficult to change everything in a day. But if we tried to change it in 6 years, maybe we could have done it. Any comment?
Okay. Complicated questions. I will have to give just very brief answers. Yes, a recession was necessary, but not of that size. There are many calculations that economists do. It should have been roughly 15 or 16% of what it was in 2009 or 2008. The extra, about 10 points, was thanks to our inability both to implement the structural reforms, but also to have a minimum of political consensus. For instance, there is an interesting calculation that a couple of colleagues have done, Manolis Galenianos and Kostas Arkolakis, that basically show that if the economy had adjusted through exports the way that it was planned, it would come to about the numbers I'm giving you. But the problem was not economics. The problem was the politics. All right? And one can hope that now we have closed the circle and we are opening a new chapter.
I want to ask about some disconnect politically that has to do with sort of misdiagnosis, outside by, creditor countries, by IMF. In other words, IMF comes in, it's only fiscal, that's all they can think about somehow, because they think Greece is developed, institutionally more than it is maybe, or whatever. Or they kind of, by their approach, may sort of divert attention from those issues, so you see a deterioration. And so it's a question of maybe of communication, or clearly media-wise, if you think of democracies in Europe and in Greece, in terms of what the populations of countries, and I mentioned, how Germany doesn't think anything was its fault, all Greek, lazy Greeks, whatever, that they tell their people, and then how you communicate with your people in terms of the needs for these, for institutional reforms. So my question is, how do you think better communication, to the question of anybody's listening to you, to the wisdom, is with both sort of, creditors, and then creditors kind of being more intelligent about what they push for, so they don't create as much resistance?
Yes, I'll try to be brief also. So first of all, the IMF, in the self-assessment that they have done, because the Europeans don't do self-assessments, the IMF does, actually they do mention that they underestimated the degree of state capacity of the Greek government. So it seems that Greece had some good politicians, people, administrators, they tried. It seems that the system, perhaps because of the influence of insiders, was very much resistant. This is something that clearly the Troika failed to realize, and they realized actually quite late. Secondly, because Greece was a member of the EU, was one of the 25 richest countries, nobody outside Greece could actually really view Greece through perhaps the lens of an emerging market crisis, although there were like very many similarities. And third, on the communication, and this goes back also to your earlier remark, it is true that 6 years have passed, but we have here 2 former prime ministers, and I think there have been like 3 or 4 others, right? If we were to go over like ministers of justice or ministers of education, there have been like many. So it's not that the people actually were extremely impatient. So they wanted like quick fixes. I think there was a previous question on that. We wanted like a fix, like drug addicts. Like let's have like something tomorrow. And the fundamentals, to change, it takes a lot of time. And this clearly, both the Greeks and the international community failed to communicate to a great extent.
Yeah, I've got it. See, it's here. I want to go back to I'm very tempted to comment on the economics, but I'll avoid that and go back to this fundamental issue of trust. I think, first, Greece should not feel that it is the only country in the world, or even in the developed world, or even in Europe, that is suffering from a big deficit in trust. If you look at the United States, there's clearly a very substantial proportion of the population that doesn't trust anything that politicians say, right? If you look at the United Kingdom in this referendum campaign, there is a very substantial proportion of the population on both sides of the issue who don't trust a word, don't believe what anybody says, including, by the way, I regret to say, economists. 90% of economists will say, you know, Brexit would be bad for your health economically. People simply don't believe. They don't believe the data. They are not willing to look at the data, right? And I think this is a very general point. We could go around Europe and find it too. So what's the answer to this? I never used to believe in the great man or woman theory of history, the Tolstoyan sort of view of the world, but I'm beginning to come around to the view that we are very much lacking in leadership, in personal political leadership, in people with a vision to stand up and say, tell the people the truth in a way that is actually believable. And the question is whether the question now, coming to that, is whether out of this very fragmented body politic that Greece now has, and I think there you are not at an extreme, but it is clearly very fragmented, whether there is any prospect of that kind of leadership coming forward.
Let's pass the answer to Lucas after former Prime Minister.
Ms. Xafar had a question.
A question for Mr. Pikramenos. If you were Prime Minister again, what would be the top 3 things you would do to fix the judicial system? And also, what's your reaction to Stefanos Manos' proposal for a constitution that provides for just one constitutional court to replace the 6 or 7 higher courts we have, Άριος Πάγος, Συμβούλιο Επικρατείας, Ελεγκτικό Συνέδριο, etc., and also to prohibit lawyers from striking?
Thank you.
Θα απαντήσω ελληνικά. Πρώτα απ' όλα θέλω να διευκρινίσω ότι όταν μιλάμε για πρωθυπουργός, εγώ ήμουν πρωθυπουργός, I was a caretaker prime minister for 40 days only, and my only job was to do elections, nothing more. I faced severe problems, but that's another problem. So, what would I do with the justice? 3 things, because one thing maybe would be enough. I would try to deal with δικηγόρους, πώς το λένε. I think, ναι, με τους δικηγόρους. Πιστεύω ότι ένα από τα μεγαλύτερα προβλήματα της δικαιοσύνης είναι το δικηγορικό σώμα αυτή τη στιγμή και η ακαμψία η οποία δείχνει ενάντια σε κάθε πρόοδο, σε κάθε προοδευτική ρύθμιση, σε όλα αυτά. Και αυτό είναι ένα πολύ δύσκολο πρόβλημα να το αντιμετωπίσεις, διότι η πλειοψηφία μέσα στη Βουλή είναι δικηγόροι. Και είναι λίγο σαν το γόρδιο δεσμό. Δεν βλέπω πώς αυτό το πρόβλημα μπορεί να λυθεί. Για μένα είναι απαράδεκτο αυτή τη στιγμή το δικηγορικό σώμα. Είμαι πολύ τολμηρός βέβαια που τα λέω αυτά, αλλά αυτή είναι η αλήθεια. Να εμποδίζει την απονομή της δικαιοσύνης για πόσο καιρό την εμποδίζει τώρα, για 7 μήνες κλπ. Αυτό είναι παραβίαση θεμελιωδών αρχών του κράτους δικαίου. Και δεν βλέπουμε να υπάρχει καμία αντίδραση, δεν βλέπουμε να γίνεται τίποτα. Κύριε Υπουργέ, ξέρετε πολύ καλά, διότι ήταν επί απεργία σας, επί υπουργεία σας. Γλώσσα λανθάνους, ξέρετε πολύ καλά ότι το Συμβούλιο της Επικρατείας, το οποίο είχα την τιμή να είμαι πρόεδρος εκείνη την εποχή, δεν απήργησε ποτέ. Τώρα εγώ δεν μπορώ να είμαι υπεύθυνος για την κυρία Θάνου. Καταδικάζω με κάθε τρόπο την απεργία των δικαστικών λειτουργών, ωστόσο οφείλω να πω, και θυμάστε τα είχαμε πει και σε μια γενική συνέλευση, ότι και η αντιμετώπιση από την πλευρά της πολιτείας των δικαστών δεν είναι η πρέπουσα. Μπορούν να γίνουν πολλά. Εγώ εκείνο ένα άλλο πράγμα που ήθελα να σας πω πάνω στην ερώτηση, αν δεν μακρηγορώ, αν μακρηγορώ κόψω.
Είναι και το ερώτημα για τη συνταγματική αναθεώρηση.
Θα πω και για τη συνταγματική αναθεώρηση, αλλά αυτό το οποίο έχω υποστήριξει τα τελευταία χρόνια είναι η οικονομική ανεξαρτησία της δικαιοσύνης. Δεν μπορεί η δικαιοσύνη, η οποία έχει δικούς της πόρους, να εξαρτάται από τον προϋπολογισμό του Υπουργείου Δικαιοσύνης. Εάν θεωρούμε τους δικαστές αρκετά σοβαρούς για να παίρνουν αποφάσεις για τα συνταγματικά θέματα, μπορούν να διαχειριστούν και τους οικονομικούς πόρους όπως γίνεται στα περισσότερα κράτη της Ιφιλίου. Δεν είναι δυνατόν να αποφασίζει μονομερώς η πολιτεία και να κόβει οριζόντια τους μισθούς, να απαξιώνει ανθρώπους, να θίγει το κύρος δικαιοσύνης. Αυτά είναι πράγματα τα οποία δεν γίνονται. Πρέπει λοιπόν η πολιτεία να αποδώσει τη δικαιοσύνη αυτά που της οφείλει. Για το Σύνταγμα, τι να πω για το Σύνταγμα. Εγώ πιστεύω ότι δεν πρόκειται να γίνει τίποτα με το Σύνταγμα, αν με ρωτάτε. Θεωρώ ότι αυτό είναι ένας πολιτικός ελιγμός, ότι γίνεται για να στραφεί το ενδιαφέρον των πολιτών της Ελλάδος προς άλλες κατευθύνσεις. Η αλήθεια πάντως είναι ότι η χώρα αυτή δύσκολα κυβερνιέται με το υπάρχον σύστημα, το οποίο έχει αγκυλώσεις. Είναι ένα σύνταγμα ξεπερασμένο. Και εκείνο που ήθελα να πω, για να μην μακρηγορώ, απαντώντας και στην προηγούμενη ερώτηση, είναι ότι έχει φτάσει η ώρα να βρεθεί στη χώρα μας κοινός τόπος, να υπάρξει συνένεση. Αν δεν υπάρξει συνένεση, στην Ισπανία και στην Πορτογαλία τα μνημόνια εκπονήθηκαν και υπογράφηκαν και από την κυβέρνηση και από την αντιπολίτευση. Εδώ δεν είναι δυνατόν το ένα κόμμα να βγάζει τα μάτια του άλλου, λέγοντας ψέματα, μη αλήθειες και υποσχόμενα πράγματα τα οποία δεν γίνονται. Κάποιος επιτέλους πρέπει να πει την αλήθεια στον ελληνικό λαό.
I think this is an appropriate note to bring this panel to a close. I think you will agree with me that despite being quite late in the day, it generated some very, very fruitful conversation. So thank you very much to all the distinguished panelists. And I'd like to hand it over to Panos Lekas to introduce the next speaker.